I am LuAnne Acton Ross, an Executive Vice President with Asset Living. Prior to Asset Living, I was a partner with JMG Realty, and we were purchased by Asset Living in 2021. So welcome. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Taryn?
Hi there. Taryn Lewis. I'm with Avenue 5 Residential. I'm Vice President of Compliance and Centralization.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kimberly Ramsey, Senior Vice President of Community Operations with KETTLER.
Hi, Jackie Impelletier. I'm the COO at ZRS Management.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Smith. I'm the classic sponsor that's been put on this panel. I promise I was an operator, but over across the pond in the UK and Europe, I ran multifamily and student housing. And now I'm Chief Business Officer at VerbaFlow AI, which is an AI CRM and communications platform.
Thank you, guys. So our panel discussion today is One Vision, Many Doors, Scaling Multifamily Through Centralization. And the first question I have for our panelists is, with centralization models well established in your organizations, where are you seeing the most meaningful impact today, especially in regards to efficiencies you didn't originally expect? Kimberly, you want to start?
That's a great question. I would say where we're seeing the biggest impact is really through our central business office. We implemented a central business office, piloted it about 2 years ago in August 2024. And the original intent of that was really to take a lot of the administrative tasks off of the site teams. And so basically lifting those to allow our site teams to focus more on what matters most, which of course is leasing and occupancy, taking care of our customers in the resident experience, maintaining the standards of the community, and ultimately growing NOI for our clients, of course. In addition to that, some of the things that have also helped to lift those tasks off the site team were the centralization of procurement and contracting, as well as invoice processing. So again, just looking for every opportunity to take away some of that administrative lift to really allow the site teams to focus on what matters most.
And I would truly echo that. One thing that when we started centralization, we really focused on building efficiencies. How did we speed up month end or that renewal process? And we did that, and we did that successfully. But what we also really, the impact that I saw that really shocked me was the impact for the on-site teams and how they were able to add more time back in their days so that they could do exactly what you're saying, is that building that just those efficiencies, building that time to build with their residents, which therefore turned into that leasing velocity that we all want to see.
I can't say there's one main impact. For us, we're a pure fee manager, and so we started our centralization journey about 3 years ago, and we knew that we needed to create a more efficient, streamlined operating model for our owners. And if our owners weren't going to buy in, and if they did not see the value, then it was just not going to be viable for us as a fee manager. So we we're very focused on the teams, and but I think my focus really is about making sure that there's a value proposition for the owners that we serve, and continuing to refine that. So, as a fee manager, we don't have the luxury of saying we're going to centralize and wipe out an assistant manager and get the bottom line effect. We have to do it a little bit in a different way, but I think we've been successful, and it's been a fun journey so far.
So with my operator hat on, having worked in the UK and Europe, that is a centralized model. So we're well used to it. So we've seen in the US, of course, and I've written at length about this, about how sort of decentralized the operating model has been. You have bigger assets, you have a lot more site staff, and I think there is a bit of a tendency for AI companies to kind of come on and say, look, you can streamline everything, you can get rid of all of your teams if you really need to. And what we're trying to do and sort of say slightly differently is to say, look, we're used to centralization. That's what, that we cut our teeth. We're the biggest AI communications platform in Europe, primarily, where the assets are smaller, the site teams are running lean. And what we want to do is make sure that we can showcase the streamlining of systems, and as and where you need it, we can streamline the staffing on site, but also any kind of resident contact center or sales or leasing center, there's definite opportunities to streamline there as well.
Excellent, and I thought that was interesting that you said that U.S. is a little, you didn't say it this way, but we're kind of behind the times on centralization.
Yes, but not behind the times on AI. In the UK and Europe, my job is incredibly easy. I'm pushing an open door because there's no other platform like what we're doing. But over here in the US, we know that you have some incumbents, and we're trying to showcase that we can offer value and that we can really make sure that we're adding to the sector rather than just, hey, here's another bit of tech you can bolt on. So we're offering the opportunity to replace that CRM, which is typically a clunky PMS CRM, or a HubSpot or a Salesforce or something along those lines. So,
thank you. So as centralized models have scaled, have there been areas where you have had to adjust, either by moving tasks back to the property level or clarifying to ownership to maintain speed, accountability, and trust across the teams?
For us, as we were centralizing, we were noticing that it took about 90 days, 60 to 90 days for on-site teams to really buy into this centralization model, for them to trust what it is that we were bringing to them. And when we did, they gained that confidence. They gained that, they were able to see that that model is really supporting their day. And once we were able to reduce that operational lift, those administrative functions, they gained so much trust and confidence that we're seeing, I've said it before, I'm gonna say it this entire time, but we really started to see leasing velocity. We're seeing resident engagement surveys starting to pick up because of the time that the on-site team now has that they're able to put in to their residents that they weren't before because they were so busy handling that administrative function.
I would say one of the adjustments we had to make early on was just realize that we knew it wasn't a one-size-fits-all, that it had to be the right staffing for us to introduce the central business office model for some of our communities. So if we had a small team, because in some situations it did centralize one of the on-site office positions. So a lot of the administrative duties that used to be done by an assistant manager for some of the properties that participated were then centralized. In which case that did allow us to have efficiencies on site from the staffing model standpoint. But we did find that even at certain communities that appeared that the staffing would work that way, it didn't, because the demographic demand for that community was different. And so there just was a much higher demand for the office team, in which case in certain situations we had to then kind of backtrack and add back a position on site. And we did find that it was important that that position have a manager title. There's a lot of customers, when they're upset, I want to talk to the manager. So we did implement a sales and service manager position. And so they really helped field a lot of the customer concerns, helped oversee the leasing team from a management standpoint, and really provided a buffer or help lighten the load for our community managers at those assets.
Great.
I would just add that we definitely had to adjust every step of the way, and we had to be very nimble. So I don't think any of us started with this like hardcore playbook that was like, this is how we're going to centralize, because we really just learned over time that there were things that we thought were going to work and they just didn't. And then there were a ton of things that just bubbled to the surface that we were like, yes, that's it. That's amazing. The one thing I will say is that our teams were actively working against us. It was so frustrating in the beginning, and it does require a lot of buy-in. The property managers have to still feel in control of their real estate asset. That is the biggest thing that you have to continue to communicate and reinforce. There is a big us versus them mentality that happens when you first start to centralize. And if you don't have a team from the top, the bottom, the middle, all echoing the same one team philosophy, you will really struggle to be able to be effective. So I would agree with Taryn, 90 days is like when everybody starts to just like take a deep breath. It's almost like a technology hype cycle. If you guys have ever heard about the Gartner hype cycle, centralization very much follows that model.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But then try selling AI into anybody where they are concerned for their jobs. And I think that's the balance that we've had to strike. What we've had to show is that, that flexibility, the agility with regards to our system, making sure that we can tailor it accordingly. And that hasn't always been easy. We know, and we've seen the lessons from the US, but we've applied them as best we can. But it is fascinating to hear you talk about the centralization and what is important at the different times in either the leasing cycle or the operations cycle, and how important, turn is in student housing, or the check-in and check-out processes in multifamily. And so we just make sure that we're as agile as we possibly can be. But that messaging is really tricky to get right, especially when you're pitching to a leasing director with, their leasing team behind them who are all panicking for their roles. But it should be complementing your structure and your systems and allowing you that breathing room, because we've been through 2 phases of launching this. Phase 1 was, part of the hype cycle. Everybody gets on board because they want to be innovators, or they just want to have the new thing, and they don't necessarily know how to deploy it. Phase 2 is show the ROI, show the case studies, and really interesting to see who hasn't deployed in as full a manner as they possibly could, and the questions that they're asking now compared to how it was when we first started selling this in. So it's just being really flexible. That's key.
I think the key takeaway is that there's not one model that fits every asset or every company. I mean, it depends on the property type, whether it be affordable, student, market rate, BTR, whatever, demographic, I think one of you mentioned, and the profile. I think that there's going to be a different, and I think in the beginning, I think that was the biggest misconception at all. It's going to, what they're doing is going to work for us. Yeah. And that, I think we've understood that that's definitely not the case. How are you evolving your technology stack and vendor partnerships to support centralized operations without creating silos or adding complexity for on-site teams and residents?
For Avenue 5, every tool has to really work for the on-site team. If it's going to create friction, it's not going to work for them. And so we're leaning into AI, as is the common theme as we're hearing today, but we're leaning into AI as well for many of the administrative functions that go along with centralization. But we're careful not to introduce complexity, because when we do that, it's absolutely going to fail. We're preferring platforms that are solving multiple solutions. So one platform can solve multiple solutions versus finding multiple platforms that will solve one challenge.
We're doing something similar. Again, trying to go deeper with the technology and the softwares that we do have versus continuing to add more and more and more. So for all of you that asked for meetings with me separately to talk about your technology, I'm kidding.
I apologize.
Just teasing. No, but we really were very careful in going deeper and certainly adding solutions where it makes sense. But to that point, we have also used, AI solutions to help drive, leasing. We have AI solutions that are helping with leasing, that are also helping with renewals, helping with invoice processing, and we are working with our vendor partners to, even some of the rental payments and things like that to expedite that process and have, take that lift off the teams where people are all coming in the door and handing someone a check. In addition to that, we are actually working to pilot some AI agents to help with other heavier lift processes like accruals, accounting month end, and the list continues. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully I can update you next year.
Great.
The tech stack is the most complex it's ever been in the history of multifamily. I think the world is moving so fast, and what we are seeing, this rapid change, and what I committed to today or yesterday when we walk out of this room, I promise there's going to be something evolved and innovated better and faster. And so that's the hard part for us, is we want to be involved in really tight vendor partnerships, but we really expect those vendors to innovate and work alongside of us so that we're not missing the boat on that next best thing that's going to evolve our business. And so that is something that we're highly focused on, is really just making sure that we leave room for us to be exploratory. I feel like this industry goes from cycle to cycle where we say, okay, we're going to do best in class point solution, and then we're going to do whatever's in the vertical, and we kind of keep going back and forth. And I don't know where we are now, but I just know these are exciting times, and we have to work together, and we all have to earn our business every single day. When you're a fee manager, you are a company of 30-day contracts, baby, and we have to keep earning it. And so I expect our vendors to keep earning our business by innovating and being good partners to us.
So from a systems perspective, we are systems agnostic in terms of the PMS. So we have to integrate with literally every PMS out there. And that's really important, and it gives you the foundation, but it's all change. Like the way that people lease and the way that people, purchase properties as well, is going to change massively. When you think about having your own AI agent, what you're going to do probably within the next 18 months is tell your AI agent, go and book me multifamily or an apartment or something in Austin, Texas. It's going to compare, based on its knowledge of you, exactly what it thinks that you should actually have from your room or apartment or your property. Is it based on your brand values, etc.? Then it's going to give you a couple of options, and then at some point you're going to go to the website, which is probably going to look very different to how it does now, because you probably won't need a booking journey. You won't need a PMS booking journey in the traditional sense that you have now, because you will go and have a look at the social proof, the reviews, the social media, some of the glossy pictures and the fly-throughs and the VR tours and whatever it might be. And then you'll just say, great, go and book it. And then your AI agent will go and book it. So everything's getting pushed further and further down the sales funnel. And again, that's where AI comes in, because it's responding. Like, you don't need your teams to be responding to say, what's the pet policy, what's the cancellation policy, etc. All of that is, you don't need your teams responding to that. That can just be automated. What you'll need to do is focus on community, people on site, and making sure that resident experience is absolutely first class. So the tech stack is going to change dramatically. Like I said before, we're focused on that CRM and communications piece. We know that you'll need your PMS, and we'll link in with all of them as much as we can.
Right, and I think that there is a fine line on at what point do you get into the different new technologies, because I think, as Jackie said, there's something new that's coming 60, 90 days from there. So if you're an early adapter, the con to that is you may be missing out on something that's a little bit better. So you've got to weigh the two and figure out when to implement the new technology that's coming in. Beyond cost savings, how are you measuring whether centralization is truly improving asset performance and resident outcomes? Which metrics matter more today than they did in your early centralization phase? Kimberly?
We started off with just we established key performance indicators to measure the success of the things that we were implementing from a centralized standpoint. And that ranged, and we continue to look at those on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, to really continue to not only track the initial progress, but the long-term trends. And that's been very beneficial. But that includes, looking at our delinquency KPIs and seeing, delinquency going down, collections going up, occupancy and leasing and closing ratios, is that being impacted? Renewals, is that happening faster? Are we capturing more of them? Are we seeing, better return on our renewals and new leases? So looking at those types of things. But I'd say over time, then we really started to shift to make sure that we were also looking at the bigger picture in terms of the customer experience. As we've centralized things, is that impacting the customer experience? What are our customers telling us? Because it's only successful if they tell us it is. And so looking at the Kingsley survey results, looking at our online brand reputation and the reviews, and really monitoring that progress over time, and seeing if there's any negative impact, of course. And then also employee retention, because, as we all said, it was, not something that people adopted with open arms to start with. And so really looking at that impact on employee retention, career paths, and seeing, are we still having the right career paths and growth? Because if we don't, people aren't going to stay somewhere where they can't continue to grow in their careers and meet their goals and expectations. And so to have that top talent, you have to have that career growth as well. And so, we've actually seen some really great outcomes from that, and seen new career paths be evolving from this, but it was definitely not something that, right out of the gate, everybody was running towards with open arms.
But you learned very quickly how important that was.
Yes.
And again, I would echo Kimberly. Initially, we really looked at the hours saved, the efficiencies created, and while all of that is super important, and it remains just as important, everything you said is really how we're measuring. Is delinquency going down? Are renewals being done quicker? Is leasing increasing? It's also important, do our employees, I think employee satisfaction is just as important as resident satisfaction, because it costs a lot of money to continuously add more employees to your stack. So I'm echoing everything that you've said. You said it so well. So thanks.
I agree. Our measurement is still kind of a work in progress. I think our leasing data is probably the cleanest. That shows when we routed all of our incoming leasing calls to our centralized call center. On average, our properties were missing guaranteed 50% of the incoming calls come in. When we centralized, that dropped to less than 10%. That is a revenue story because that is getting to the customer when they want, when they're hot, when they're ready. Because I tell you, if you miss them in that opportunity, they are not going to wait for a call back or an email. They want to be communicated with right then and there. So I think our centralized leasing has been the greatest case study that we've really been able to see the return. And, we'll continue to monitor the delinquency and all of the things in the central business office, but leasing definitely has been the most impactful.
I think you've all covered that pretty perfectly, to be honest. But one of the interesting things is that we have so much communication coming into a centralized platform that we obviously have all the typical KPIs. We're very focused on the lag time, on how many leads we're closing out of hours or tickets that we're closing for maintenance or whatever it might be. And it's 60% of communication comes out of hours. And I think that's a really interesting thing that's missed leases, that's missed opportunities to step into that resident experience and say, okay, let's help you out with that. I'll just transfer you to whoever if it needs to, if you're locked in somewhere or the shower's burst or whatever it might be. So I think that's where, it's really important that we're tracking all of that and we're showcasing it in a dashboard. But that communication also comes to our platform so that you could see if in all of your leasing, somebody's, your most common word that's used is fitness center, then you're not doing a good enough job on your website of talking about your fitness center, or your leasing teams aren't doing a good enough job of talking about how good the fitness center is. So that's your opportunity to bridge the gap between leasing, marketing, and operations, and you can do that just by seeing that it comes up on a nice little word cloud or whatever it might be, and then showcases how you can improve that journey for them as well, and remove any questions. That's the key thing.
Yeah, I think that we all agree that monitoring KPIs is huge, but just as important to me is the human indicators, whether it be your on-site team and their buy-in or your residents. I think those are, again, for us that have been in property management and actually worked on site, I think those are key. And we've seen how that affects us if it's not aligned. So that's huge. From a people and culture perspective, what has changed most as centralized teams have scaled? And what would you approach differently if you were building your model again today? Jackie?
We have identified really smart people inside of our organization that I think otherwise would have gone unnoticed by centralizing. Kind of to your point on the career pathing, I think we have been excited about breaking the norms of multifamily and following the career track that everybody has always done for years, leasing assistant, manager, regional manager, and we've created some really critical roles inside of our organization that I think has shifted the culture. It has helped our retention. So that is definitely something that we continue to invest heavily in, is just being open-minded about the roles and the people. What I would do differently, was that the second part of the question? I'll tell you, I would go to owners directly and I would pitch centralization from the get-go. And it's not a mistake that we made. We didn't know what we were doing. We jumped out a window and hoped there was a mattress on the ground to catch us. So we were just we'll just figure it out as we go. But I wished we had gone to owners directly and talked to them about this experiment of centralization more clearly and more excitedly about saying, we don't really know exactly how it's going to go, but I'm going to promise you it's going to be more efficient. You are going to see cost savings. We relied on our regional managers and our property managers who were directly affected in their minds negatively to be the conduit for us to our owners. And so that is something that if I could go back in time, I might not have a pitch deck, but I'll tell you, the owners that we work for, they don't mind a little uncertainty if you're like locked arms with them, but they don't like surprises. And so I feel like that is an area that we would definitely do different.
I think that centralization point is fascinating, and I think it's key. And I would say that yes, there is an opportunity to centralize for sure in a lot of the operations that we've seen in multifamily in the US. I think it's really important. I've used this phrase a few times that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to those staffing levels. And where we're at in the UK and Europe in particular is that we have this almost a saturation point of everybody using AI now. And we've got about 30% of the multifamily and student housing market in the UK in particular. And so we're now starting to see people say, all right, well, how do we make sure that we're differentiating ourselves? Because everybody's got AI, everyone's got the instant approaches, you've got the chatbots, you've got the voice AI agents or whatever else it might be. How do you differentiate? And the key is going to be people. So yes, I know that's slightly counterintuitive for a prop tech salesperson. Oh, that actually hurts when I say that. But a prop tech salesperson to say, look, really focus on the people, but that's exactly what you need to do. You need to make sure that you are training them, that you aren't just, right, okay, so how can we streamline all of this? That's why we focus on the systems. We can say, look, we'll give you systems savings, give you some breathing time to work out what your structure should look like from a centralization point of view, but also then from an asset level. So AI can give you a lot of breathing room in that sense, but it should be adding value. And that's the great thing that, a lot of people approaching it now are starting to say, show me the ROI, show me the case studies. And that's something, again, where we can come in and show that.
Similar to what you were saying, I'd say, the people part was huge. And I sort of touched on this before, but I'd say the biggest change that we've seen over time was the buy-in from both the site team employees as well as our clients. We're also like third-party fee managed. Some of them were resistant in the beginning with good reason. They wanted to make sure again that it did not impact the customer experience because providing that positive customer experience was important to them. So some of them wanted us to try it out, which we always do. We test it out on ourselves. So if it fails miserably, we've only hurt ourselves and not our clients. But it was very successful in having those KPIs to share with them and to show, honestly, the improvement in some areas in terms of the customer experience. But for the site teams, that was the biggest one. Again, initially, it was met with a lot of resistance, not just from people whose positions were shifting to centralized positions, and we did make sure we had opportunities for all of them to land in different roles, but also for the rest of the site teams, because everybody was used to that 1 per 100 staffing model, and that's what we need, and that's what works, and there's no way we could possibly do it with less. And so that was a challenge. And specifically, there was one team member that came to mind. She was very upset when we centralized her position. She was an assistant manager at Affordable Community. And she did not initially respond, as positively as I'd hoped, but she did accept a position. She had been in her position about 15 years, would have never left. She had been under the same manager for the whole time she'd been there, never wanted to get promoted, never wanted to leave the community she was at, and she was phenomenal. So I forced her to take a promotion, and no, I didn't, but she did agree ultimately to take a community manager role. We're like, you're ready, you can do this. And she not only took that role and was very successful at it, but she continued to grow where she became a general manager, and this is all in less than 2 years, overseeing multiple affordable communities. And then she said, you know what, I would have never changed if if this hadn't happened, and now I want to do conventional properties. And now she has been promoted to general manager at 2 very high-end, high-profile luxury communities, and she's just thriving from it. So that was just one great success story that I loved, seeing the result of. And then in addition to that, the people that, chose to become central business managers that, would oversee like 5 properties from that administrative standpoint, we also created career paths for them. And so we have different levels at the central business manager position, and 2 of them have gone on to be promoted to community manager roles as well, so to go back on site. And so we were able to prove that out and see that that also works. So I'd say those were some of the biggest advancements we've had over the past year, and we use those stories in situations like this at our conferences, in-house, to sell the advantages to our on-site teams and help them to feel more comfortable with the adopting the change.
And I would say that initially, as I was starting to roll out centralization at Avenue 5, I was really hesitant to share with our teams that centralization was coming. I was worried that they would really start to worry about their jobs, and not just the property manager, but just everyone on site, that they would start to worry what is going to happen to my job next. And so I started changing how I was communicating, and I was overly communicating, making sure that they understood that centralization was there to be a support for them and not a replacement. And so as I started doing that, as we started getting the regional managers, their VPs, et cetera, to really start to remind them that this is to support you, we saw that buy-in again. And then with that buy-in, they started to see that this was a really huge impact to their jobs. And then from an associate standpoint, those that joined our centralization teams, because there were jobs that were shifting as well, I thought for certain we would see a lot more assistant managers applying to join our centralized team. Mm-hmm. And instead it's been property managers, which has been just shocking to me how many property managers have joined our centralized team, but they actually are probably some of the most professional people. So we're not having to, with an assistant, we'd have to train a little bit more, but with the property managers, they're coming in just ready to do that job. So there's not as much training. And I think they're also seeing that alternative career path that they weren't, their next path was regional. Well, now they're seeing that there's something different for them as well. So I think that was probably what really just surprised me the most, was seeing who applied for these roles.
Well, to echo what all of you have said, I think it's a pretty common theme. I mean, you've got to get the buy-in from the teams. And I think from our perspective, I don't think we did a good job of letting them know your career path or your job may be different, but there's job security, right? And we have to get the buy-in or it's just not going to work. And then also, just as important, was setting expectations for the clients, realistic expectations for the client, because I think we all, them included, thought that it was going to be this miracle and there was going to be a huge
Cost savings.
Yes, cost savings, financial impact, and yes, there is, but again, we don't want to jeopardize the user experience. We don't want to jeopardize the team members feeling like they don't have a future or that they're going to leave. So those are, in hindsight, those were things that I wish that we had done a little bit more effectively. What advice would you give organizations that centralized early but are now struggling to evolve their model? Taryn, you want to start?
Sure. I think the biggest advice that I would give is be willing to pivot. If something's not working or if it's too hard, change. Make sure, be willing to change the process. If your on-site teams, their regional leaders are expressing that something's not working, hear them out and make those changes. And I think by doing that, you gain a ton of trust and a ton of buy-in.
Yep. And I would just say, to piggyback on that, just communication is key. Over communicating with the site teams, because again, I think we knew that it was going to be an impact to them, but we probably underestimated the impact. And so just making sure that you have those doors of communication open. We can try to proactively anticipate as many concerns as we can and try to speak to those up front with team members, with clients. But you can't anticipate everything. None of us have the crystal ball. So another thing I think would be key is just continuing to have those open lines of communication, like have, weekly meetings. We had weekly meetings for the first 60 days, and then we made them monthly meetings throughout that whole first year, because, opportunities would continue to arise. And so as concerns came up or the teams encountered problems or challenges, it's so critical for them to be able to voice those quickly so that, to your point, you can pivot quickly. Nobody has it all worked out. I love the way you said it, that we are jumping out and hoping there's a mattress there at the bottom. Very much the same thing, but the more we can keep that frequent communication so that when challenges arise, you can switch gears quickly and work with the teams to resolve them, the quicker they will, adopt what's going on and you'll get their buy-in, and the quicker we all grow and continue to be more successful together.
And don't be afraid to abandon something that's not working. Just because you were an early adapter with centralization doesn't mean that everybody's looking at you and you can't admit that something's not working. Be willing to pivot and actually, just change completely if it's not working. Jackie?
Yeah, I agree with that. I would also say really hone in on, is it the model or is it the adoption? And when you can figure out which it is, you're going to really be able to better understand how to intervene and how to make changes so that you can be successful. I would also say that don't let the early wins sort of be the ceiling that sort of defines how centralized works. Be willing to try and test different things along the way. We started out with 2 roles, and now we have 4 or 5 different roles that we have centralized. And so they're like little spin-offs that, we would go to our clients, we would go to our properties, and we would say, what are you trying to solve for? And we would figure out, can we centralize for that? And in many cases, we could. And so I think that would be advice that I would give. And the other thing is, know that AI is going to change your centralized model. Know it, and you need to prepare for what's next, not what's now. And that is the big thing. AI is an enabler, but it's also a challenge for centralized models, because there is this misconception that AI can replace centralized in some circumstances. And so we have to actively coach and educate where that sweet spot is of supercharging, enabling with AI, and that's what makes really centralized successful.
That's where every good tech provider, AI provider, should be working hand in glove to really understand your operation, whether you've got 1,000 beds or units or whether you've got 100,000. And I think that's absolutely key. For me, my advice, I would say there's 2 key things here. Jump out the window, to use your phrase, Jackie, and because you just have to test, and make sure that you are comparing it. Take VerbaFlow as an example. We'll do a free 3-month pilot, and we'll make sure that we're integrating. We'll do all the heavy lifting. Test us against some of your other communications platforms that have been around for donkey's years. And you can see the value. Ultimately, we're happy to put our money where our mouth is. So we'll make sure that we have that 3-month free pilot. We'll do all the legwork, but then it's ultimately about making sure that you're delivering. That's absolutely key. So, test it, but make sure you're also then tracking all of the results beyond it. So I think the other key thing is that just stop signing such long contracts with any tech providers. I'd love you to sign a 3-year contract with VerbaFlow right now. I wouldn't advise it as an operator, because you want to make sure, to your point, Taryn, that you can pivot. You have to be able to pivot. If you've got a 3-year contract with a slightly outdated tech solution, you're in real trouble. You are going to get usurped. There are going to be plenty of competitors that come after you and take the food off your plate. So I think make sure that you aren't duped into the whole, do it. Can you do a 3-year contract? Does that work? No, sign a 1-year contract so that you can potentially have a break clause in it as well. We won't be pushing, everybody to sign up. Like I said, I'd love it, but we won't be pushing everyone to sign up on those long contracts. So test it, try it out, and then the proof is in the pudding. If it works, great, but you've got that, hopefully the ROI to showcase it.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Looking ahead, what decisions are you making now to ensure your centralized operating model remains adaptable as markets, labor dynamics, and resident expectations continue to evolve?
Who wants to take that one? I'm happy to. We're really doubling down on standardizing our process so that, if there's glitches, if there's things that we need to make changes to, we can do that pretty easily.
Well, one, I will not be signing any more 3-year contracts, so we got to be adaptable. Good advice. We've continued to involve some of those centralized functions as well. And so when you think about, for example, the central business office, initially it was, it's going to take care of all of these responsibilities. Well, we found that some clients didn't want us to take care of all those responsibilities. And so we've really made it customizable. So, for some it focuses on delinquency. For some it helps with accounting month end. For some the focus is more on renewals. So customizable packages with also customizable pricing. But I think just that ability to adapt, we've had to adapt and have, really really think about the different markets and demographics too, and have people that are bilingual for certain markets and demographics. Also making sure that, with the jurisdictional guidelines and restrictions in different areas, that we have to have market experts in that, and we've had to kind of flex what portfolios look like. So, those are some of the steps, but again, just constantly keeping our finger on the ever-changing pulse of technology and AI so that we're able to adapt, we're able to pivot, and we're continuing to keep up with the times, which is hard to do right now. So,
Absolutely.
I can't add anything better to that.
I'll add a bit from the resident expectations perspective. And I think one of the key things that we're trying to showcase is that you've got to listen to your residents consistently. And as a supplier to the industry, we have to do that too. But we're aggregating all that communication. So we need to make sure that we are surveying them, ensuring that they understand, that our clients in particular understand where people want to talk to AI and where they don't. And where they don't, we've got to make sure that we're supporting the operator in particular to really meet the resident where they are and then deliver exactly what they need. And that might be handing off to a human. And I think that's where AI needs to complement everything that you're doing as an operator, whether you're fully centralized, whether you're slightly decentralized, whether you're fully decentralized. And I think that's where any good platform will work with you to understand your residents, how they feel about AI and the communications, and then ensure that they're delivering accordingly. This isn't about upsells. Like, we have a land and expand model. We'll start with maybe a chatbot, for example, and then we show, again, the proof is in the pudding. So we have to be surveying the residents. So I'd say make sure that we're continuing to do that.
Great point. I think we have a few minutes. So if there are any questions from the audience, raise your, okay, hi.
Hey, I know you guys talk about renewables. As anyone actually says, like maintenance, the $100 maintenance, but I know you guys still have to hear from the department how you guys think about it. I've really thought to address maintenance and move towards specialization of pro-list within maintenance. So what you guys hope that looks like and how you're doing it.
Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start that we've started testing that because, like you, I've heard that some companies are doing a great job with it, and they've even specialized it to the extent of this person's best with HVAC, this person is our plumbing expert, and really centralizing functions to that extent. We haven't gotten that far, but at some of our communities that are closer together, we have started to pod service teams, and it's also helped tremendously in terms of them not being on call as often and as frequently. So we've started it with baby steps, and that's really where we are now, is just really podding service teams that are in close proximity to one another to drive those efficiencies and also to give that better work-life balance for our service team members. But we haven't really taken it to that next level yet that I have heard some other organizations have been very successful with.
I think the troubleshooting part, the initial troubleshooting and walking a resident through that, I think people have been doing that for quite some time. I think that as far as the maintenance team is concerned, I think it's important and almost a deal breaker if you don't have a large presence in that market. You can't ask a maintenance guy. We had a client that has 5 new developments, but they're in Central Florida, but they're not close. And he wanted one maintenance person to have to go to all of those. You can't do that. It's great in theory, but you have to have a large geographic presence in a particular market. Would you all agree with that? I don't know how you make that work without that.
Yeah, it's a huge risk. We look at it as, we serve about 120 different owners, and it is a challenge when you don't have the concentration. And there's some clients that just don't want to share the staff across ownership groups. I will say maintenance prioritization is where it's at for us. So it's really about using technology to say if you're turning a unit in building 6 and there's 2 other work orders, that AI is just allocating those work orders to that particular maintenance technician so that they don't have to drive back and forth to the maintenance shop. And it's really just about being more efficient with the prioritization of service by location or in an area within the community. So that's been pretty helpful and impactful for us.
I agree with all of that. It shouldn't be centralization just for the sake of it. I think there's got to be an actual purpose behind it, and that, again, has to focus on the resident. So if you look at, again, the UK and Europe with a decentralized model, they've tried that, and I think that the levels of satisfaction when it comes to maintenance in the US at the moment would be far higher. This is obviously absolute guessing, so don't take this as gospel. But in my experience, understanding the US and Europe as I do, obviously you have those central teams. You have much bigger assets, so you can have a maintenance person on site. In the UK or Europe, you typically don't. It is outsourced, and you might have a facilities management firm doing all of that. Coordinating that is really tricky. And then, how do you make sure your facilities management firm is integrated into your PMS, because you don't want someone going to another app or whatever else it might be. Is there an API link or whatever? I think that's where you've just got to find that balance between where you can streamline and where you can't. But there's tech for that. You can see it around at the moment. You may well be from from one of those solutions, but equally, I think that's a big opportunity for any AI firm to consolidate and triage any kind of maintenance, and then, as you said, find the suppliers, make sure that they're talking to them. You can even close a work stream within that, and the costs and whatever else. So I think there's a big opportunity. You just, again, be really careful not to just centralize for the sake of it.
Great, thank you. I think we've run out of time. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank the panelists for their participation today. You guys were amazing, and I learned a lot from you guys. So thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.